Ilhan Omar stepped into the Fox News studio, fully prepared to characterize J.D. Vance as racially prejudiced before he had even uttered a single syllable. The Marine veteran from Ohio observed a congresswoman who had potentially entered into a marital union with her biological brother to secure a green card, who had described the September 11th attacks as merely some people doing something, and who had instructed Somalis in Somalia to question which country she truly represented. He had brought the marriage certificates she had been concealing for years, signaling that this was not destined to be a standard debate, but rather a reckoning. Fox News had arranged this event as a discussion regarding immigration policy and assimilation in America. Yet, every viewer understood the true underlying context. For years, substantial questions had circulated around Ilhan Omar that the mainstream media had simply refused to investigate, dismissing them all as conspiracy theories or racism. The questions remained: did she actually marry her brother, Ahmed Nur Said Elmi, in 2009 to commit immigration fraud and obtain a green card for him? Why did she minimize the worst terrorist attack on American soil as nothing more than some people doing something? How exactly did a congresswoman earning $174,000 a year accrue a net worth in the millions while paying her husband's company nearly $3 million in campaign funds? Why did she disseminate anti-Semitism so vile and obvious that her own Democratic Party had been forced to condemn her twice with official House resolutions? Furthermore, why did she travel to Somalia and tell crowds there to ask us what country we are from, instead of simply stating she was an American representative? J.D. Vance had spent 3 weeks preparing for this confrontation, and he had not wasted time on policy white papers or abstract arguments. He possessed actual marriage certificates from Hennepin County, Minnesota, showing Ilhan Omar married Ahmed Nur Said Elmi on February 12, 2009. He had school enrollment records obtained from researchers in Mogadishu showing both Ilhan Nur Said Elmi and Ahmed Nur Said Elmi listed with identical parent names. He held family photographs that had been posted on social media showing Omar and Elmi together as children in the same household before everything was systematically deleted once allegations surfaced. He had screenshots of posts from Omar's own relatives calling Elmi her brother in both English and Somali, archived before the mass deletion. He possessed tax documents obtained through legal channels showing she filed joint returns with Ahmed Hirsi during years she was legally married to Elmi. He had Minnesota Campaign Finance Board official findings documenting violations. He had video of every controversial statement she had ever made, alongside congressional voting records, all of it organized, verified, and ready to display on Fox's massive screens. The question of what would happen when a Marine who had served in Iraq and taken his oath seriously confronted someone who had possibly defrauded the very immigration system he had defended would expose the biggest cover-up in modern congressional history, and the Islamophobia shield that had protected Omar for years was not going to work against a veteran carrying documented evidence. The Fox News studio was filled with 450 people, and the energy was tense from the moment the doors opened. Omar's small section of supporters sat together, wearing hijabs and holding signs about Islamophobia, looking defiant but clearly uncomfortable in deeply hostile territory. The rest of the audience was overwhelmingly pro-Vance, including a significant number of military veterans wearing their service on caps and shirts, there specifically to watch a fellow Marine ask questions politicians had been too afraid to voice. Ilhan Omar entered first to scattered applause from her supporters and sustained loud boos from everyone else. She wore a brightly colored hijab and an expensive-looking suit, carrying herself with the defiant pride of someone who had weathered controversy by calling it all bigotry and looked prepared to deploy her standard defense strategy. She assumed any criticism would be labeled Islamophobia. Any evidence would be claimed as fabricated, and any question would be dismissed as racist. She had perfected this shield over 5 years in Congress and assumed it would work here like it had everywhere else. But she had catastrophically underestimated J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance walked out 30 seconds later to a roar that lasted nearly 4 minutes. At 39 years old, with the bearing and haircut of the Marine he had been, wearing a simple dark suit, he carried 3 thick folders, which he sat down next to his chair with a deliberate thud that everyone heard. The contrast was immediate and stark. She looked like a politician prepared for victim narratives, while he looked like a prosecutor arriving with evidence. Brett Baier opened with standard language about respectful dialogue and focusing on substance rather than personal attacks, an aspiration that would last approximately 2 minutes. When asked for her opening statement, Omar deployed her practiced opening, speaking in that distinctive accent that her supporters found authentic and her critics found grating. She stated she was there because certain people refused to accept that a black Muslim refugee woman could serve in Congress and represent Americans, claiming the attacks against her were rooted in Islamophobia and racism, from people who could not accept that someone who looked like her and believed what she believed could be American, declaring she would not be silenced. Her supporters applauded enthusiastically, and she sat back looking satisfied, confident she had established the moral framework that would protect her. Vance looked at her with something between pity and contempt. When he spoke, his voice carried that slight Appalachian accent that marked him as genuinely from working-class America rather than performing it. He told the Congresswoman that he was going to talk about evidence that night. Not theories or speculation, but evidence, documents, and records, including her own statements, and he was going to ask direct questions that required yes or no answers. He opened his first folder, and the studio screens lit up with an image that made Omar visibly tense. A marriage certificate from Hennepin County, Minnesota, dated February 12, 2009, showing Ilhan Abdullahi Omar, married to Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi. He suggested they start there. As the marriage certificate filled every screen in the studio, official and undeniable, with Omar's name and Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi's name bound together in legal marriage, documented by the state of Minnesota. Vance let it sit there, and the silence was heavy and uncomfortable. He began with a conversational but firm tone, noting she came to America as a refugee in 1995 when she was 12 years old because Somalia was in chaos and civil war, and her family fled. He reminded her that America took her in when her country could not protect her, gave her safety, education, and opportunity, eventually gave her citizenship, and even elected her to Congress as one of 435 people chosen to represent over 300 million Americans. He paused, letting that history establish itself before continuing to talk about Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi, the man she married in February 2009. Omar's face had gone pale, as she knew exactly where this was heading, and had no good answers prepared, because she had never been forced to actually answer before. Vance asked if she married him on February 12, 2009, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, noting it was a matter of public record and demanded a yes or no. Omar tried to deflect into her prepared script about her personal marital history being subject to scrutiny, but Vance interrupted with his Marine directness, cutting through any attempt at evasion, asking again if she married Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi on February 12, 2009. She could not deny a public marriage record that was on screen for millions to see, so she admitted the marriage occurred. Vance thanked her, and proceeded to show why millions of Americans believed Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi was her brother. The screens changed to show old-school enrollment records from Somalia, documents that researchers had spent months obtaining and verifying. Vance walked toward the screens to narrate what they showed, explaining these were school records from Mogadishu from before she came to America, listing students and their parents. He pointed out Ilhan Nur Said Elmi, listed as a student with parent names Nur Said Elmi and his wife, and in the same records, Ahmed Nur Said Elmi, listed as a student with the exact same parent names. He turned to face Omar directly, stating that with the same parents and same household, according to these educational records from Somalia, she and Ahmed Elmi were siblings with the same mother and father. The audience was completely silent, and even Omar's supporters looked troubled, staring at documents they could not easily dismiss. Vance pulled out photographs next, and they appeared on screen. Images clearly from decades ago, showing a young girl who was unmistakably Omar and a young boy standing together in what looked like family settings, playing together in family photographs, clearly part of the same household. He stated these were family photographs that were posted on social media before they were all deleted. Once allegations surfaced, showing her and Ahmed Elmi as children together in the same family and household. He showed more evidence, screenshots of social media posts that had been archived before deletion, posts from people who appeared to be family members written in both English and Somali, referring to Ahmed Elmi as brother in the context of discussing family. He emphasized that these posts were from her own relatives before everything got scrubbed from the internet, and they called him her brother. Vance walked back toward his chair but didn't sit, picking up another document to address the name itself. He explained that while her full name is Ilhan Abdullahi Omar, her middle names when she was born were Nur Saeed, which was her father's name, and Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi has her father's name as his first and middle names, which is a Somali naming tradition, where children carry their father's name. He let all that evidence sit for a moment before laying out the theory, explaining that investigators believe Ahmed Nur Said Elmi came to America needing immigration status and a green card, and since he was her brother, he could not get status easily on his own. Vance posited that since she was already a United States citizen by 2009, she married him as brother and sister, committing immigration fraud to get her brother a green card through spousal immigration. The timeline appeared on screen, and Vance narrated it like a story about fraud rather than reading bullet points. In 2009, she married him, and he filed for permanent resident status as her spouse. From 2009 through 2017, he established his status and life in America, using their marriage as his legal foundation. In 2017, once he was completely established and his green card was secure, she divorced him. And in 2018, she legally married Ahmed Hirsi, who she had actually been with all along, and who was the father of her children. Vance pulled out the most damaging evidence yet, tax returns showing joint filing, noting that during the years she was legally married to Ahmed Elmi from 2009 to 2017, she was also filing joint tax returns with Ahmed Hirsi, a completely different man. He declared she had two husbands for tax purposes, which constituted tax fraud on top of immigration fraud. He showed the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board findings, stating Minnesota investigated this, found violations, and fined her $3,469, noting her payment of the fine was an admission that something was wrong with her tax filings during her marriage to Elmi. Vance walked closer to Omar's chair as she sat frozen, unable to mount an effective defense against documents and records. He told her he was going to ask her directly on national television, with millions of Americans watching, and with all the evidence displayed for everyone to see. He paused, and the silence was absolute, asking, "Is Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi her brother?" The question hung in the air, as everyone waited for this moment. Omar's face flushed as she looked at her handlers off stage, then back at Vance. When she finally spoke, it wasn't an answer. She claimed these disgusting smears were rooted in Islamophobia and racism, and had been investigated and debunked. Vance cut her off, his voice hard, stating that was not an answer, and that he asked a simple yes or no question. Is Ahmed Noor Said Elmi her brother? When she refused to dignify it with a yes or no, Vance's voice adopted the command tone. Marines learn, asking again if he is her brother. Omar wouldn't answer, pivoting to attacking the question as racist and the evidence as fabricated, labeling the whole line of inquiry as bigotry. Vance let her finish, then delivered his response quietly but firmly, noting that her refusal to say no was what everyone needed to understand. He emphasized he didn't ask a complicated policy question, but asked if a specific man was her brother, and she refused to say no. He gestured to the screen, still showing the evidence, challenging her to explain how the school records were wrong, clarify whose family the photos showed, explain why her relatives were lying when they called him brother, and explain the coincidence of his name carrying her father's name. Vance walked back to center stage, observing she would not explain any of it, but just called everyone who asked questions racist. He noted she would not deny he is her brother, and would not take a DNA test to prove he is not. Instead, attacking anyone who looked at the evidence, he turned to face her directly for his conclusion, stating, he served in Iraq as a United States Marine and took an oath to defend this country and its laws, fighting to protect borders and the immigration system. He accused her of possibly committing immigration fraud by marrying her own brother to get him a green card, violating federal law, and defrauding the very system that saved her from Somalia, all while serving in the United States Congress. His final line was delivered with quiet intensity. If he is not her brother, she should prove it, take a DNA test, show America the results, and release her full immigration records, but she won't because she can't, and her silence tells everyone everything they need to know. The audience erupted, and even some of Omar's supporters looked shaken by her refusal to simply deny the accusation. Vance did not give her time to recover or redeploy her victim narrative. He was already pulling out his next folder, and the screens were changing to show a date everyone recognized. September 11th, Lingyi. Vance began quietly, noting he was 17 years old that day, a senior in high school in Middletown, Ohio. He recalled watching the news like everyone else, seeing the second plane hit live, watching the towers fall, and watching people jump from burning buildings because staying inside meant burning alive. He paused, and in that pause was the memory that tens of millions of Americans shared. He explained he joined the Marines partly because of that day, understanding the country had been attacked and that Al-Qaeda had declared war on America. He recounted going to Iraq, serving in a combat zone, and doing his part in the war that started because 19 terrorists murdered nearly 3,000 Americans that morning. Vance looked up from his notes and directly at Omar, suggesting they talk about how she described September 11th. The screen showed Omar at a CARE event in March 2019, speaking casually and almost dismissively about civil liberties and Muslim American rights, before delivering the line that would define her callousness forever, that CAIR was founded after 9/11, because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. Vance replayed just that one phrase. Some people did something, then let it play again, and one more time. The repetition made it sound even more callous than the first hearing. Vance pulled out a list, but didn't read it like a list. He told stories. He spoke of Gordon Amos Jr., who worked at Sandler O'Neill on the 104th floor of the South Tower, 32 years old, whose body was never recovered. He paused before continuing with Edelmiro Abad, a senior vice president at Fiduciary Trust, 54 years old, a father and husband working in the towers that morning, emphasizing he was not some people who had something done, but was murdered by terrorists. Vance continued with more names, not mechanically but as individual human tragedies. Marie Rose Abad, 49 years old. Andrew Anthony Abate, 37 years old, from Cantor Fitzgerald. Vincent Abate, 40 years old, from Cantor Fitzgerald. He looked up from his list, noting these were just the first 5 names alphabetically out of 2,977 Americans who were murdered. Not some people who had something done to them, but murdered by al-Qaeda terrorists who hijacked planes and flew them into buildings full of innocent people. Vance's voice changed from recounting names to something with real anger behind it, mentioning the 343 New York City firefighters who ran into those burning towers, going up the stairs, while everyone else was running down, knowing the buildings might collapse but going anyway, and dying crushed under millions of tons of steel and concrete. He stated these weren't some people doing something. These were heroes sacrificing themselves for strangers. He pulled out photographs from 9/11 showing the burning towers, people covered in ash, fleeing the collapse, captured in sequence, and first responders buried in rubble. The images were devastating, and the room was completely silent. He said he served with Marines who joined because of 9/11, guys who saw those towers fall and said, "This is my country under attack, and I need to defend it." Some of them didn't come home, killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, fighting the same kind of terrorism that murdered Americans that day. Vance turned to face Omar, accusing her of calling it some people did something like it was a parking violation or a minor incident, treating the worst terrorist attack on American soil as just something that happened. Omar tried to defend herself, claiming the quote had been taken out of context and weaponized. Vance's voice rose to a shout, declaring, "There is no context where calling mass murder some people did something is acceptable." He noted she didn't say terrorists, didn't say al-Qaeda, didn't say attack or murdered or slaughtered. She said, "Some people did something." He showed clips of her defending the statement when criticized, noting she hadn't apologized or clarified, just claimed people were twisting her words. Vance walked toward center stage, carrying the weight of his military service in his bearing, reminding her that America gave her refuge when Somalia was too dangerous, and then 19 terrorists attacked America, murdering nearly 3,000 people, yet she could not even properly describe what happened, or call it terrorism. He let that sink in before stating he wore the uniform and fought in the war that came from that day, losing friends who never came home, while she minimized their sacrifice and the attack that started it all. Vance returned to his chair and delivered his final assessment, sitting down and looking directly at Omar, stating, "That is not just offensive or insensitive, but contempt. Contempt for America, for the victims, and for everyone who served and sacrificed." He concluded that her inability to even honor Americans properly when they are murdered by terrorists disqualifies her from representing Americans in Congress. The silence that followed was profound, as even Omar's supporters couldn't find a defense for those words. The evidence was her own voice, minimizing mass murder. Vance moved immediately to his next attack, giving Omar no chance to reset. He proposed they talk about anti-Semitism because her hatred of Jews was so obvious and vile that her own party was forced to condemn her. Not Republicans, but her own Democrats, twice. The screen displayed House Resolution 183, dated March 7, 2019. Omar tried to interrupt with her standard defense about criticizing Israel not being anti-Semitism, but Vance spoke over her, insisting this wasn't about Israel policy, but about her spreading classic anti-Semitic tropes that have been used to justify violence against Jews for centuries. He showed everyone exactly what she said, as the screens filled with Omar's tweets. Vance read them aloud like he was quoting someone in a conversation rather than reading a formal list. He cited February 10, 2019, when someone asked why American politicians support Israel, and her response was, "It's all about the Benjamins, baby," with a money bag emoji. He let that sit, explaining she was saying Jews buy political support with money, that American politicians only support Israel because Jews pay them to, and that Jews control politics with cash, which he identified as textbook anti-Semitism and Nazi propaganda. The next tweet appeared, dated November 16, 2012, stating, "Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel." Vance looked up, explaining that claiming Jews have mystical powers to control and hypnotize people to make the world blind to their evil is another classic anti-Semitic trope that appears in the protocols of the Elders of Zion. He showed more tweets where she compared Israel to Nazi Germany, suggested Jewish Americans had dual loyalty, and spread conspiracy theories about Jewish influence. He stated, "This wasn't criticizing Israeli policy, but spreading hatred of Jews, using the same language used to persecute them for centuries." Vance pulled out the House resolutions, noting her own party was so embarrassed they passed an official resolution specifically because of her statements. He pointed to House Resolution 183 from March 2019, where the House officially condemned anti-Semitism in response to her tweets with a vote count of 407 to 23, with her own party leadership voting to condemn what she said. He paused before delivering the kicker that she did it again, requiring a second resolution. House Resolution 489 from July 2019, meaning her own party had to officially rebuke her twice in 4 months for Jew hatred. He asked when that had ever happened to any member of Congress. He continued, noting she voted against Iron Dome funding, the defensive system that protects Israeli civilians from Hamas rockets, being one of only 9 members to vote no. Vance's voice took on that Marine intensity again, stating he served with Jewish Marines who were some of the bravest people he had ever known, and she spread conspiracy theories about Jews controlling the world with money. He walked closer to her chair, noting she supports BDS, which is economic warfare against the only democracy in the Middle East, compares Israel to apartheid South Africa, votes against every measure supporting Israel's defense, and sides with Hamas and Hezbollah over a democratic ally. The final assessment came with genuine disgust, reminding her that her own Democrats condemned her twice, which showed how bad her Jew hatred was. Vance sat back down, having made his point that she cannot hide behind criticism of Israel when spreading the same tropes Nazis used and when her own party condemns her. Vance grabbed his next folder, and the screen displayed the company logo E Street Group. He shifted the topic to money, specifically campaign money going to her husband's company. The name Tim Minett appeared on screen, followed by E Street Group LLC, and the number $2,800,000. Vance stated her husband, Tim Minett, owns E Street Group, a political consulting firm, and since 2018, her campaign had paid his company approximately $2.8 million. He then addressed how Tim became her husband, involving an affair, 2 broken marriages, and millions in campaign funds. He pulled out divorce filings and narrated a timeline. In 2018, Tim Minett was married to Beth Minett, and his company started working for Omar's campaign while she was married to Ahmed Hirsi. In August 2019, Beth Minett filed for divorce, citing her husband's affair with Representative Ilhan Omar. In October 2019, Omar divorced Ahmed Hirsi. In December, they were photographed together. and in March 2020, she married Tim Minette. Vance summarized that Tim worked for her campaign. They started an affair, while both married to others. Both divorced their spouses, married each other, and through all of this, her campaign kept paying his company hundreds of thousands of dollars. He pulled out payment records showing travel services, consulting fees, media production, and digital strategy, totaling nearly $3 million paid to her husband's company from campaign donors. The Minnesota Campaign Finance Board findings appeared, showing she was issued the largest fine ever levied against a sitting House member at that time, $3,469, which she paid. Vance's voice shifted to genuine working-class outrage, contrasting his upbringing in Appalachia and struggle with poverty against her coming as a refugee and now being wealthy, paying her husband millions in campaign funds. He stated the FEC had received multiple complaints, alleging she was funneling donor money to herself through her husband's company, calling it theft with paperwork. His conclusion was direct. She came to America with nothing. America gave her opportunity, and she used it to steal from working people's campaign donations to enrich her husband and family, labeling it corruption, not public service. Vance pulled out video footage with visible anticipation, noting this was going to hurt her badly. He recalled that in August 2022, she visited Somalia and spoke to large crowds. The screen showed Omar in Somalia wearing traditional dress, speaking passionately in Somali with subtitles appearing, translating her words, "Ask us what country we are from." Vance played it again, ensuring the meaning was unmistakable. He noted she told Somalis to ask her what country she is from, not that she is an American congresswoman or serves the United States. He asked the obvious question, what country is she from? Omar tried to give a complex answer about diaspora communities, but Vance interrupted, demanding a simple answer. He observed, she cannot say America or I'm American first, or clearly state where her loyalty lies. He pulled out the oath of office and read it with gravity, swearing to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies. He looked up, emphasizing allegiance to the United States, not Somalia. Vance set down the oath document and spoke from personal experience, stating he took that oath when he joined the Marines and meant every word, willing to die for it. He turned to face Omar, accusing her of taking the same oath, but going to Somalia and telling them to ask what country she is from and promoting Somalia's interests. Her voting record appeared, and Vance narrated her pattern of voting against American interests, against condemning Hamas, against supporting Israel, and against sanctions on Iran. He walked closer, stating he served one country and fought for one nation, asking who she is serving. Vance's voice became harder as he mentioned friends buried at Arlington Cemetery who knew which country they served, contrasting them with her refusal to clearly state she puts America first. His conclusion was devastating. America saved her from Somalia and gave her everything Somalia couldn't. Yet, she goes back to Somalia and won't even clearly say she is American. He delivered the final line quietly. Maybe she represents the wrong country. Vance pulled out his final prepared evidence before the climax. Video footage from an interview discussing a college course. He told everyone to watch what she does when terrorism is mentioned. The clip played, showing a professor mentioning Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, and as each name was said, Omar made exaggerated air quotes with her fingers and a mocking expression, suggesting the designation of these groups as terrorists was questionable. Vance replayed it twice without commentary. He began speaking when the clip finished, his voice quiet but intense, stating he served in Iraq and fought against the same kind of terrorism Al-Qaeda represents. seeing up close what terrorists do. He paused to establish credibility before continuing, pointing out, she makes air quotes like, Al-Qaeda isn't really a terrorist organization. The numbers appeared on screen as Vance recited that Al-Qaeda murdered 2,977 Americans on September 11th. His voice rose, mentioning Marines he served with, who were in that war because of what Al-Qaeda did, some of whom are dead, while she makes air quotes, suggesting they aren't really terrorists. He showed the Hezbollah connection, noting Hezbollah killed 241 United States Marines in Beirut in 1983 with a truck bomb. Vance walked toward Omar's chair, accusing her of making air quotes, suggesting Hezbollah isn't really a terrorist group. He pulled together the pattern, minimizing 9/11, air quotes, about Al-Qaeda, voting against anti-terrorism measures, and defending state sponsors of terrorism. He asked a simple question with marine intensity. Is Al-Qaeda a terrorist organization? Yes or no? Omar couldn't give a simple yes, starting to explain context. Vance demanded a yes or no. She kept deflecting. Vance let her refusal stand as an indictment, stating she cannot even clearly call Al-Qaeda terrorists or condemn the group that killed nearly 3,000 Americans. His conclusion was absolute. He took an oath to defend America against enemies, and she took that oath too, but she isn't sure who the enemies are, which is dangerous and disqualifies her from national security decisions. Vance stood and walked to center stage for his final statement, leaving his folders behind to speak from conviction. He wanted to make clear what this was really about. He paused, gathering his thoughts, recalling being 17 when 9/11 happened, and joining the Marines to serve the country that gave his family opportunity. He walked a few steps, then turned to face Omar, recounting how she came as a refugee in 1995 from a failed state, and America took her in. He let that sink in before listing how she repaid that gift. He delivered a comprehensive indictment. She possibly committed immigration fraud by marrying her brother, supported by overwhelming evidence she won't deny or test for. She minimized September 11th. As some people did something, she spread anti-Semitism so vile. Her own Democrats condemned her twice. She paid nearly $3 million to her husband's company while having an affair with him. She went to Somalia and told them to ask what country she is from, and she makes air quotes about Al-Qaeda. Vance stood still at center stage, looking directly at Omar, reminding her they both took oaths to America. His voice rose with conviction, stating he honored that oath and served in combat, while she broke that oath, possibly defrauding the immigration system, spreading anti-Semitism, enriching herself, and showing loyalty to Somalia. He invoked Marine values, mentioning friends at Arlington who gave everything, while she spits on their sacrifice. Vance walked closer for his final statement, telling her she came with nothing, and America gave her everything. Yet she spent her time attacking and defrauding America. He turned to the cameras and the millions watching, declaring Americans deserve representatives who love this country and keep their oaths, not someone who possibly committed fraud and won't say America first. He turned back to Omar for the final line. I served America, you defrauded it. That's the difference between us, and America deserves better than you. The standing ovation lasted 7 full minutes, the sound deafening as veterans stood at attention. Omar sat unable to respond, as every point was backed by undeniable evidence. The video reached 198 million views within 1 week, and within 48 hours, the FBI faced overwhelming pressure to investigate. The phrase, "Is Ahmed Elmi your brother?" trended for 2 weeks. Her own Democratic Party distanced themselves, and veterans groups organized campaigns demanding her removal. 6 months later, A moderate Democrat challenged her, and polls showed her support collapsing. 1 year after the debate, facing certain defeat, Omar announced she wouldn't seek re-election. J.D. Vance had done what mainstream media never would: asked the uncomfortable questions, showed the uncomfortable evidence, and demanded uncomfortable answers. When she tried to hide behind accusations of bigotry, his military service gave him armor. He proved that evidence defeats victimhood narratives, and that asking hard questions isn't bigotry when you have the receipts.